Good morning, Patreon community. This is Dr. Glenn Doyle. And the reason why I'm doing this quick video this morning is because, as you know, one of the reasons why I started this Patreon page was to take you a little deeper into some of the concepts and some of the tools and some of the skills that I discuss out there on the blog and on the Facebook page. I kind of want to help people who pay this extra level take that next step and really apply the things that we discuss out there on the Facebook page. And so one of the tools, so it's one of the things I'm going to be doing with this page. I'm going to be doing it more and more often. Is just taking a few minutes and describing and actually demonstrating some of the tools and skills that I personally use to navigate, not only my own recovery journey, but also how I live a life of high performance and high satisfaction. And when I say I live a life of high performance and high satisfaction, I want to be really clear about what I mean. I don't necessarily mean that there's anything magical about high performance and high achievement. Okay, there has been a lot of research devoted to this subject in psychology circles over the years, because for years that was kind of the prevailing wisdom, is that people who achieve more tend to be happier. And so there's been a lot of research about whether or not that's necessarily true. And what they found is that that's not necessarily true. It's not necessarily true that people who achieve more, who achieve more of their goals or have more material success, it's not necessarily true that they're necessarily happier than people who don't. What the research has actually established is that the people who tend to be happier have found things to like and value and enjoy in the process of achieving their goals, right? That is to say, like, another way to think about that is, look, you can achieve every goal you have for yourself, but if you are hating the process, then you're probably not going to be happy. So when I say I live a life of high productivity and high achievement, it's not the case that I'm happier because I achieve more of my goals. I'll tell you the role that achievement actually serves in my life. I've discussed at great length out there on the page about how I have ADHD. And one of the things that this means for me is that in order to stay interested in life, I have to have a lot of what I talk about are shiny objects to chase. Okay, so I need things to kind of keep me interested. I need things to kind of keep me passionate, and I tend to need a variety of things to kind of keep me interested, passionate. It's one of the reasons why somebody asked me, how do you keep up with all the various things that you do, right? Like, so I do the Dr. Doyle page, and I do the Faith and Works page. I do these videos. I do this Patreon. I do several projects that you guys have no idea about, right? How do you keep up with all that stuff? And my answer to that is like, well, it's one of the things that keeps me interested in life is that I have a lot of projects and I have a lot of things that interest me. And the process of achievement interests me greatly. So let's be very clear. It's not about necessarily being a high achiever leading to happiness. It's a matter of having things in your life, projects in your life that you are really interested in and can get really passionate about. The reason why I happen to need a lot of variety in those projects is because my brain gets bored. Okay, like if I just had, like, this kind of dovetails with the video that I made last night, where that guy was trying to convince you that you shouldn't do stuff that you're never going to be great at. I think one of the reasons why I had such a reaction to that was that, look, if I limited myself to just a couple projects that I know I can do really well, I think I would be bored out of my mind. Like, that would be a recipe for boredom and unhappiness for me. And all of which is very consistent with the point that I make very consistently out there on the Facebook page as well, is that, look, your recipe for what makes a satisfying life for you is going to be pretty unique to you. Your job in this whole thing is to kind of become an experimenter, is to become a scientist and put together the happiness equation that works well for you. Okay. So in my mind, living a life of high achievement, again, is not necessarily about achieving those things, although that's nice. The high satisfaction that my life involves comes from pursuing a variety of projects that I can be passionate about. It's about kind of keeping my brain from going on autopilot and getting too bored, right? But that's just for me. I know for some people, to kind of live that way would get really overwhelming, right? So we have to get really interested in and passionate about the happiness equation for us individually. So that's my spiel about living a life of high achievement, high satisfaction. But coming back to the purpose of this video and some of these tools that I'm going to be talking about on Patreon, I want to go a little deeper than what I'm able to write about out there, and I want to actually show you guys some of these tools and kind of explain how they're used and kind of answer some of your questions about how they are used, right? And we're going to start with something, really basic here. One of the tools that I use every single day, at least twice a day, and usually more often than that, is the skill of hypnosis and meditation. Now, I stumbled on hypnosis when I was in high school, like when I kind of started my self-help journey. I got really, really interested in what I thought were non-ordinary states of consciousness. Okay. And what that meant at the time was, look, we live life on this level of kind of waking consciousness every day. And I was really interested in, like, how can I switch things up? How can I feel different things? How can I use my brain and my mind to induce different states of feeling? Not necessarily how can I think about different things, but how can I think about the things that I have to think about in a way that's more effective and more enjoyable. And so this led me to study altered states of consciousness, naturally altered states of consciousness. Because the other thing is, like, I've never been a drinker. I've never been a drinker, and I've never been a drug user. I grew up with alcohol abuse in my family, and that made a very strong impression upon me when I was young. I made the decision when I was pretty young that I was not going to use that stuff. I watched my dad, who was a very brilliant guy. He started businesses, and he was, really passionate, really creative. I watched him turn into an idiot when he drank. So early on, I developed a belief system that was not for me, that I was not going to do that. But I still had this real interest in changing the way that my brain worked, and changing the way that my focus worked, and changing the way that my consciousness worked. So that led me kind of on this journey. How I said in the video last night, you got to get really interested in the things that you're interested in. You got to kind of chase those things down. And what I talked about a moment ago about how you have to put together the building blocks of your own personal happiness equation. Well, this voracious appetite to learn about things brought me to naturally altered states of consciousness. And I say I thought they were non-ordinary states of consciousness. As it turns out, hypnosis and meditation, which are very closely related in their phenomenology, and what they look like. As it turns out, they're more natural than we thought they were. We kind of think about hypnosis as this thing that needs to be imposed upon us from the outside by a hypnotist. As it turns out, most hypnosis is self-hypnosis. As it turns out, the state of consciousness that we call hypnosis, or that we call meditative, we usually experience that a couple times a day anyway. I'll tell you what hypnosis is, and what meditation, what most people are talking about when they say meditation. I'll tell you what that really is. Our brains emit these things that are called brain waves. There's the natural functioning of our nervous system has a frequency, and that frequency is different when we are doing various things. Like, so our frequency when we are asleep is it's called a delta wave. Like it's slow and it's easy, right? You know, like when we calm down to go to sleep, ideally slow, easy. Like if we made a graph of it, you know, the peaks of the waves would be, you know, relatively spread out in a delta wave. When we're normal waking, right, like when we're just up and about, we have higher frequency brain waves, and those are usually what are called beta waves. You know, it would look like this. Okay, so when we're slow, it looks like this. Or awake, looks like that. Here's the thing, as it turns out, when we are awake, when our brain waves are operating at a pretty high frequency, we are less suggestible. We are less open to possibility. We're more on our guard. Okay? So if I said to you, well, in a normal waking state of consciousness, if I said to you, you know, you are a great guy or girl, you are awesome. If I said that to you, well, your brain waves look like this. There would be part of your brain that you know, really examined that. So, why is he saying this? What does he mean when he says this? Is this true? Right? Your brain would descend upon that statement and really kind of analyze it and not let a lot of it in. We're less suggestible when we are, you know, when our brain waves are working really fast. When our brain waves slow down a little bit, we are a little more suggestible, right? The problem is when you're asleep, I can't tell you, you know, hey, you're a great guy, you're a great gal. You know, I can't do it because you're asleep. You know, you're not aware of, you know, you're not consciously aware of your environment. And I know that there are, you know, there are people who really believe in like the sleep programming, the tapes that you know, you can play all night and supposedly program yourself while you sleep. The research on that stuff is a little bit mixed. What we can do is we can take our brainwaves from going like this, and we don't have to get them going as slow as this. You know, there's kind of this mid-range that we talk about that are kind of, that are called alpha waves and theta waves. And when our brain waves are slowed down to, again, not quite the delta waves of sleep, but not, you know, the really fast beta waves of waking consciousness, that's when we tend to be pretty suggestible. And you don't have to be a researcher to experience this. Like, you know that when you're a little sleepy, when you're a little punchy, we believe things that we don't normally believe. Like, our brains will accept things that they don't normally accept. Okay? So if I slow down my brain waves and then I make a suggestion, say, hey, you're a great guy, you're a great gal, there's going to be less of a reactiveness on the part of your conscious mind. Your brain is going to be less liable to pounce on that and say, oh, what does he mean? What is his agenda? You know, your brain is going to leap on that less and tear it apart. And there's going to be a bigger part of you that just kind of takes that in and says, oh, I'm awesome. I'm great. I can internalize that. I can make that part of my, you know, self-concept, at least for today. It's been shown that when we visualize things, when our brain waves are slowed down a little bit, it has a greater tendency to internalize, has a greater tendency to have an effect on us. And by the way, this is true for both positive messages and negative messages, right? So this is one of the reasons why we have to really watch the kinds of things that we program ourselves with, especially in those times when we're kind of falling asleep. Like, I have an acquaintance who is really, really into shows like SVU, right? Like the murder shows. And I know a lot of people are. Like, I can think of several people who I know. There are some people I work with who are really into, you know, the murder shows, right? Even to the point where they fall asleep with them on. And I always tell them, boy, we have to be careful about that stuff, because the stuff that we watch and the stuff that we listen to, you know, especially as we're in those states where our brain waves are going to slow down a little bit, you know, they imprint on us to a greater extent that when we're awake. Like when we're awake and we're watching a TV show, and something happens on the TV show. We have a greater capacity to think, okay, well, that's just a TV show. That's just a TV show. That's granted, everything that we watch and everything that we read and everything that we hear, has the potential to program us. But at least when we're wide awake, our brain, we're paying attention to it. See, that's the key. If we're wide awake and we're paying attention to something, our brain has a greater capacity to be like, oh, okay, let's just all calm down. It's just a movie. It's just a TV show. But when we're falling asleep, the brain has less of an ability to do that. And it lets more of that stuff in, lets more of that stuff become, more of our basic programming. So we really have to kind of be mindful of kind of what we watch and what we listen to, especially when we're in that position to kind of drift off and not pay as concentrated attention to it, right? All of which is to say that the point of self-hypnosis and the point of meditation is to deliberately slow our brain waves down. And the point of self-hypnosis specifically is to allow ourselves to program ourselves, like when we get into that state of slower brainwave activity, to explicitly program ourselves with what are called post-hypnotic suggestions that are really helpful. And that's actually what makes the difference between something like meditation and something like self-hypnosis. Like, we pass through these states every day. Like when we're going to sleep and we're waking up, we're zoning out, okay? Like, we have states where we slow down our brain waves. Like, this naturally happens to us every day. That's why I say that, hypnosis and meditation are actually naturally occurring states of consciousness. What makes the difference between meditation and self-hypnosis, like meditation is just when you get into that state and you're just in that state. When it becomes self-hypnosis is when you consciously induce that state for the purpose of programming, okay? Now, these are tools that I use every single day, and I'm going to give you just a quick example here of how I use that tool. I'm going to give you an example. It's the morning. There are tools that I use every single day to live a life of high achievement, high satisfaction. One of my daily tools that I never skip is daily aerobic exercise. That's been the case since 2006. I found it's been an invaluable tool. Okay, there have literally been, I think, 5 days since 2006, since New Year's Day of 2006, that I've missed my workout. And those happened to be days in 2017 when I was in the hospital. I had a pulmonary embolism, and I was forced to be in the hospital for like 5 days. And literally, those are the only days when I missed my workout. Since 2006. Like, that's how effective of a tool aerobic exercise has been. We'll talk more about exercise and the interplay with exercise and physiology and psychology in a future video and some future writing, right? But that's been the one tool. The other tool has been self-hypnosis and meditation. So it's the morning. I'm going to show you specifically how I do my morning self-programming, okay? First things first, I take at least 5 minutes. Somebody made the observation, one of my clients, made the observations, boy, with you, everything is just a few minutes in the morning, a few minutes in the evening. That's true. Everything is just a few minutes in the morning, a few minutes in the evening. And the reason for that is if something is just a few minutes in the morning, a few minutes in the evening, you're more likely to do it. Something that I have found is very, very consistent is that the more complicated you make something, the less likely it is to get done, right? So I'm a big, big fan of making something just a few minutes in the morning, a few minutes in the evening. So I start out from a baseline of 5 minutes. 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes in the evening. The reason why I do that is pretty simple. If you add up 10 minutes a day, I know I've written about this a lot, but if you add up at least 10 minutes a day, then by the end of the week, you have over an hour of activity. So I know that if I do 5 minutes in the morning and 5 minutes in the evening every single day for a week, that I will have spent over an hour in that activity. And that is absolutely the kind of time that can change your brain, okay? So I start out with a baseline of 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes in the evening. Now, there are times when I do more, okay? And that's not because I'm trying to be an overachiever. That's because I find this tool so useful and so easy to apply. 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes in the evening, 5 minutes whenever. Okay. There's some tools that I use. So you remember we make the distinction between skills and tools. Being able to meditate or being able to self-hypnotize is a skill because it comes from within me. There are things that I use outside of me as tools. There are a couple of apps that I use here on my smartphone. I'm going to show you just a couple of them real quick. The first app is an app called Metro Timer, and it's just a very basic metronome app. Okay, there are dozens of them. A lot of them are free. A lot of them cost like 99 cents. But it's a metronome app. It's just an app that gives you a beat at a specific frequency, right? So if I open that timer, here's what it looks like. I've got it set to 60 beats per minute. I use this when I meditate. I also use this when I exercise to set a beat. And here's how it sounds. Like you push the button, and it just gives you a steady 1 beat per second beat. Okay? So that's the first tool I use. The second tool that I use is an app called Chime Squirrel. It's an interval timer app. And what that means is it allows you to set the duration of the activity that you're doing. So in this case, I've got my Chime Squirrel set. I don't know if you can see that right there. I've got my Chime Squirrel set to 5 minutes up here. So we're going to be doing this for 5 minutes. And I've got the chime set for 1 minute. So what this means is the app is going to let us know when 5 minutes have passed, but it's also going to make a little chime after every 1 minute. Okay. So this allows me to be able to keep track of how long I've been meditating without having to open my eyes and look at the app. Okay. Now the reason why we use the metronome timer is because it helps us regulate our breathing. Like, I'm a big fan of taking off of our radar screens things that don't need to be on our radar screens. And I don't think when you're meditating, you don't need the length of your breath to be on your radar screen. You don't need the mental burden of that. If you use a metronome to time that, you know. Like, you know that like, you're going to take a 5-second in-breath, and it's going to time it for you. Right? All you have to do is breathe in for 5. Now, the pattern that I use to induce this state of meditation, the state of self-hypnosis, I tend to breathe in for 5 seconds. I tend to hold that breath for about 3 seconds. Breathe out for another 5 seconds. And then just give your system a break for about 2 seconds. Just kind of sit there for about 2 seconds. And you want to do this a few times. And what you'll find is that the mental machinery that is responsible for inducing this altered state of consciousness will kick in after a few cycles of that kind of breathing. So here's what it looks like in practice, right? We've got our 1 beat per second. You breathe in for 5, hold for 3, breathe out for 5, rest for 2. So it goes like this. Now, if you did that with me, you're probably already starting to feel the effects of breathing at a guided rate, breathing at a measured rate, right? Now remember, what works for you may be slightly different than what works for me. For you, it may feel more comfortable to take a shorter breath or a longer breath. Like for you, it may work better just to take 3 beats in and hold for 1 and then 3 beats out. For you, it may work better to take 7 beats in and hold for 5 and then 5 beats out. I don't know. You have to experiment with what works best for you, okay? You'll remember, with all of this stuff, I'm not saying that this is the way to do it. I'm saying this is a way to do it, okay? Now, what do I visualize when I do my meditation that turns that meditation into self-hypnosis? Because again, the difference is in self-hypnosis, there's that emphasis on self-programming, right? Something that I find really important, really valuable. For my morning meditation, which is what we're doing right now, what I like to visualize as I'm breathing out, or as I'm breathing in, and like my world is expanding in here, I like to focus on the goals that I've set for myself. And as I breathe in, I imagine the world expanding to accommodate those goals. The world expanding to naturally accommodate those goals. So for example, one of the goals that I have set is to form a large and enthusiastic community here in the Dr. Glenn Doyle world, on the Facebook page, on the blog, on the Patreon page. So what I would visualize as I'm breathing in for those 5 seconds is the very molecules of the world expanding to accommodate that large, enthusiastic, passionate community, right? I visualize the world expanding to make room for that community. And then as I'm breathing out, what I visualize is the molecules of the world filling that community. So as I breathe in, I imagine the molecules of the world expanding to accommodate my vision. And then as I breathe out, I imagine the world settling into my vision, and that becoming the new normal. Does that kind of make sense? So the way that you could use this is you take whatever goal that you have, and as you breathe in for 5 or however many, I want you to imagine the world expanding to make room for that goal. And then as you breathe out, I want you to imagine you, the people around you, the world at large, settling into that goal. Okay? That goal becoming the new normal. Now we do this for 5 minutes. And that's it. Like again, there's this temptation on the part of a lot of people when we discover a tool or we discover a routine to kind of go overboard and say, okay, man, I'm going to do this for an hour every day. I know that I've been there. And I've been tempted to try and overuse a tool that I've been introduced to that I find interesting or meaningful or helpful. But the goal is to be consistent with it. So you can use it as much as you want, as long as you're getting that consistent 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes in the evening, right? As long as you have a baseline of over an hour a week, 10 minutes a day, 5 in the morning, 5 in the evening, okay? So let's go ahead and actually meditate here. I'm going to set my timer. We're going to do some meditation. We're going to do 5 minutes. And again, the point of having the Chime Squirrel app, the interval timer app, is it's going to let us know when our time is up. So we don't have to actively watch the clock. So you can keep your eyes closed. You can also keep your eyes open if you want. I find that I tend to work better with my eyes closed because then I can visualize my goal a little more effectively. I find with my ADHD, if I keep my eyes open, too many shiny objects out here. That said, we're going to get into concepts like mandalas and treasure maps and things that we can visually focus on in the course of the day that nudge us closer to our goals. So there are plenty of ways to do this eyes open as well. You experiment with what works best for you. All right? So let's finally, it's the morning. My voice is a little, my throat knows that it's the morning, right? So let's go ahead and let's meditate. Let's finally get down to meditating. Now that I've given you a half hour of explanation, right? And again, your focus is going to be expanding the world to accommodate your goal and your vision, and then collapsing the world into that goal and vision, relaxing the world into that goal and vision, settling the world into that goal and vision, making that goal and vision the new normal. Okay? So we've got our metronome app. I'm going to set to 1 beat per second. And switch over to the Chime Squirrel app, which again I have set for a 5-minute total. But it's going to chime every minute just to let us know where we are. Okay? As I start, you can see it starts to count down. Okay? Chime means we're 1 minute in. That double chime means that we're done. We're done 5 minutes. Now, a few things. You'll notice that if you did that with me, first of all, you'll notice that my cat, Abby Road, joined us for a moment. And that brings up a good point about how do we handle distractions when we're meditating or when we're inducing self-hypnosis. The time-tested way to handle a distraction like that is you acknowledge it. You don't let it derail you. You don't try to ignore it, because the more we ignore something, the more it tends to ask for our attention. We found that, right? So that was what you noticed. When she came along, she started meowing. Right? I acknowledged her, and then I returned to what I was doing. The other thing that you might have noticed was that the ratio of in-breath, hold, out-breath, rest that I was taking tended to vary a little bit. And that's an important point that, that we really need to acknowledge, is that as you do this, you're going to settle into a rhythm that you find comfortable. And to try and just stick with the rhythm that we established just for the sake of sticking with it is a mistake. What you want to do is get really curious about what's working for you that day. And what I found just now was that as I got into that, what my body was asking for was a little bit of a longer hold, right? So I eventually got to the point where I was holding for 5 or 6 beats, and a little bit of a longer rest after I exhaled. So by the time we were done, my rest was 4 or 5 beats. Okay. The point is that you stay mindful. The point is that you stay focused on it. The point is that you find what's working best for you that day. So there we go. This started out as kind of a quick introduction to my method of meditation and self-hypnosis. We're going to have a lot more, many more videos that kind of talk about this stuff, because I happen to believe that at the core of my own therapeutic technique is naturally altered states of consciousness. I happen to believe that when our lives change, the reason why they change is because we have gotten better at changing the way that we focus and making it more possible to focus on things in a more effective way for achieving our goals. So there we are, morning meditation with the doc. I want you guys to go forth and be nice to yourselves today. Ciao.